So what if reading the book of Genesis could literally halt the progression of Lou Gehrig's disease?
I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right?
Yeah, it sounds like absolute heresy to a modern doctor, and honestly probably sounds like madness to a theologian too.
Oh, definitely.
Because, we're taught to put things in very neat, distinct boxes. Like religion goes in the spiritual box, literature goes in the myth box.
Right, and medicine goes in the science box.
Exactly, complete with, MRI machines, blood panels, and heavily peer-reviewed pharmaceuticals. But the stack of sources we are opening up today, they just violently reject those boxes.
They really do. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah, and they make a claim that forces us to completely reevaluate human history. They argue that one of the most widely read, heavily debated books in human civilization, the Bible, was never actually intended to be read purely as a historical account, or even as a theological moral guide.
Yeah, it is an incredibly provocative premise. The texts we are examining today are proposing a specific, highly technical argument. They focus on this concept of basically why the Bible should actually be considered a sacred medical text.
A medical text. Not a metaphor, but an actual manual.
Exactly. And they aren't just making a vague, philosophical point about prayer making you feel better. They are decoding the Bible through the lens of a 4,000 to 8,000-year-old ancient Chinese medical practice.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. It's a practice known as Zuyu, which translates roughly to, intention-based healing.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, we are essentially taking ancient Middle Eastern scripture and cross-referencing it with prehistoric Chinese medical mechanics.
Precisely. But to even begin to grasp how these two incredibly distinct worlds overlap, we have to ask you, the listener, to do something extremely difficult right now.
Yeah, you really have to check your assumptions at the door.
You do. You need to completely suspend your modern Western understanding of human biology. Just forget the anatomical charts on your doctor's wall.
Throw them out.
Right. Forget the idea that your body is this biological machine made of isolated, replaceable parts. The idea that if the kidney is sick, you only treat the kidney.
Right, the mechanic mindset.
Exactly. For the duration of this deep dive, you have to step into a deeply ancient worldview. One where the human mind, the spirit, and the physical tissue are not separate entities interacting with each other. They are a single, continuous, indivisible, energetic system.
So it's all one thing.
All one thing. If you alter the mind, you are literally physically altering the cell.
I think that's the big hurdle, right? Because we pay lip service to the mind-body connection today. Like we know stress gives us ulcers.
Sure, or tension headaches.
Right. But these sources are taking that concept and pushing it to a terrifying, almost absolute extreme. They're saying the mind doesn't just influence the body, the mind is the blueprint of the body.
It's the architect.
So let's look at how the sources actually apply this to the Bible. Because the text that gets the most focus here is the story of the Garden of Eden.
Right, the very beginning.
Yeah. Culturally, we read Adam and Eve eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge as a story about original sin, disobedience, the fall of mankind. But how do these ancient medical sources decode that?
Well, they strip away the moral judgment entirely.
Oh, really? None of the guilt stuff?
None of it. In this medical framework, the Garden of Eden is not some geographical location in ancient Mesopotamia. And being cast out is not a divine punishment.
Okay.
Eden is an allegory for a physiological baseline. It represents a state of perfect, uncorrupted, harmonious health.
So it's a state of being, not a place.
Exactly. And the fall is a very specific medical event. It is the moment the human mind loses its pure innocence.
Wait, so the fruit of the tree of knowledge?
It's literally just knowledge. It's the moment human consciousness becomes complicated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the birth of ego, of chronic worry, of categorizing the world into good and bad or safe and dangerous. The moment you bite that fruit, your mind is burdened.
Because you're no longer just existing. You're overthinking.
Right. You're constantly anticipating the future or regretting the past. And the sources argue that this state of perpetual mental complexity and burden, that is the genesis of all human disease.
So being cast out of the garden is essentially the ancient description of being trapped in a chronic sympathetic nervous system state, like being stuck in fight or flight.
That is an excellent modern parallel, actually, yes. When you lose that childlike innocence, when you're out of Eden, your energetic system becomes fractured.
It breaks down.
Right. And the sources claim that the Bible, embedded within its stories and verses, contains a highly specific key to find your way back to that baseline of Eden.
Okay, a hidden key. I like that.
But there is a massive catch. This key cannot be handed to you by an external authority.
So a doctor can't just give it to me?
No. A priest cannot absolve you into it, and a surgeon cannot cut you open and implant it.
So how do you get it? The sources say it has to be acquired through something called repeated reading. And I have to be honest, when I first read that in the notes, I was incredibly skeptical.
It sounds a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like, what does that actually mean? Are we talking about standing in front of a mirror and reciting Genesis chapter 3 100 times until my back pain goes away? Because I mean, that just sounds like an empty ritual.
Well, it sounds like an empty ritual if you view reading merely as information intake, like you're just absorbing data.
Right.
But the sources define this repeated reading on a much deeper level. The goal isn't rote memorization at all. The text of the Bible, in this context, is designed to act as a psychological mirror, or like an energetic tuning fork.
A tuning fork. Okay.
Yeah, the repetition is meant to exhaust the analytical, skeptical part of the brain, the ego, until a profound inner awakening occurs.
Oh, I see. So it's like breaking down a muscle to build it back stronger, but you're doing it to your own consciousness.
Exactly. The text states very clearly that reading it purely for academic understanding or, historical trivia does absolutely nothing for your health.
You could be a biblical scholar and still be terribly sick.
You could read it every single day of your life, and if your internal state doesn't shift, your physical biology won't shift either. The awakening happens when you realize you are actively holding yourself out of the garden through your own mental rigidity.
Wow. And this actually brings us to how the sources view the historical Jesus.
Yeah.
Because this was another huge pivot in the text that really caught me off guard.
Oh, the reframing of his miracles.
Right. Because they do not frame him as a divine supernatural deity who, breaks the laws of physics to perform magic. And again, we're just reporting what the sources say here, not taking a theological stance. But they frame him as a master practitioner of Zuyu, of this ancient intention healing.
Yeah, they look at the biblical accounts of healing the blind, the paralyzed, the lepers, and they analyze them as highly technical, energetic interventions.
Not magic wands.
Exactly. According to this framework, Jesus wasn't overwriting biology. He was interacting with the patient's energetic system.
The phrase used in the sources is that he implanted specific intentions into the patient's mind.
Right.
So he was acting as a guide, kind of walking their consciousness back through the gates of Eden, back to that state of pure innocence where the disease simply cannot exist.
He was providing the energetic resonance of Eden and inviting the patient's spirit to match that frequency.
Okay, I have to put the brakes on here. Because my 21st century brain is flashing warning lights.
I don't blame you.
Right. Because if I am a listener, I'm thinking, you're describing a guided meditation. And sure, I buy that meditation lowers blood pressure, it relaxes you. But if someone has a malignant tumor or an autoimmune disease that is actively destroying their joints, you are saying that if they just think really hard about being innocent in a garden, the tissue repairs itself.
It sounds unbelievable.
It really does.
Yeah.
How is this any different from the placebo effect? We know placebos can make people feel better temporarily because they expect a pill to work. Are we just dressing up the placebo effect in ancient religious clothing?
That is absolutely the most important question to ask right now. And the ancient texts draw a very hard, distinct line between what we call the placebo effect and what Zuyu actually is.
Okay, break that line down for me, because I'm struggling to see the difference.
So the placebo effect relies entirely on expectation and the conscious mind. You are handed a sugar pill, your conscious brain thinks, oh, this is medicine, I will get better. And your brain releases a temporary cascade of endorphins or dopamine.
Right, it's a chemical reaction to a belief.
Exactly. It's a localized chemical response based on a trick. Zuyu, on the other hand, is not a trick. It is not merely positive visualization. It is described as a fundamental energetic reset of the entire organism.
So it's much deeper.
Much deeper. You are not just thinking about Eden. You are actively spiritually relocating your consciousness to a state before the trauma or the disease ever existed.
Oh, so it's not, I hope I get better. It's, I am returning to a state where being sick is literally impossible.
Precisely. And when that profound spiritual shift occurs, the physical body has absolutely no choice but to conform to the new reality of the mind. Remember our first rule here, they are one continuous system.
Right, they aren't separate.
The body is just the dense physical shadow of the spirit. If the spirit moves back to Eden, the shadow must follow.
But how? I really need to understand the gears turning underneath this. If the mind shifts, how does the actual physical biology, like the cells, the blood, the bone, how does it know to change?
Well, the sources say that to understand this biblical mechanism, we have to look at how it perfectly maps onto ancient Chinese medical theory.
Which brings us to the黄帝内经.
Yes, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic. It is the absolute bedrock of Chinese medicine. And it introduces a principle that explains exactly what we are talking about. It's called shifting essence and changing qi.
Shifting essence and changing qi. Okay, let's unpack that.
To understand this phrase, we have to look at the ancient triad of human existence. The texts say a human is composed of 3 interconnected layers: Jing, Qi, and Shen.
Okay, let's lay those out clearly for the listener.
Sure. So Jing translates to essence. In modern terms, think of Jing as the physical material foundation of your body. It is your flesh, your blood, your cerebrospinal fluid, your actual DNA. It is the heavy matter.
Okay, so Jing is the hardware.
Yes, perfect. Next is Qi, which translates to energy. This is the dynamic life force, the bioelectrical flow, the metabolism that animates the physical matter.
It's the current running through the hardware.
Exactly. And the third layer...
That would be Shen, right?
Yes. Shen translates to spirit or mind. This is your consciousness, your emotions, your focus, your intention. And the critical difference between modern medicine and ancient medicine is the hierarchy of these 3 things.
Modern medicine works from the bottom up.
Exactly. We try to fix the Jing, the physical matter, with a scalpel, or we try to fix the Qi, the chemical energy, with a pill.
But the ancient texts say the hierarchy is top-down. The Shen, the spirit, is the supreme commander.
Absolutely. The Shen commands the Qi, and the Qi shapes the Jing. Therefore, all physical disease begins in the Shen.
It all starts at the top.
It does. The texts describe a very specific pathology. When the spirit experiences trauma or when it develops a hyperfixation, what the sources vividly call a dead knot, it creates a literal shockwave down the chain of command.
A dead knot. That's such an evocative phrase. It implies something that has been pulled so tight it can't be undone normally.
It's the perfect description of chronic stress or deep-seated resentment, or even just the unrelenting anxiety of trying to survive in a modern economy. You know?
Totally.
A dead knot is a cognitive loop you cannot escape. And because the system is continuous, when your consciousness is tied in a dead knot, it physically chokes the flow of your qi.
The energy stagnates.
And when the energy stagnates, the physical matter at the bottom begins to decay or inflame or mutate.
So the physical disease, the arthritis, the chronic fatigue syndrome, the digestive failure, that isn't the actual disease. That is just the downstream symptom of a spiritual traffic jam.
Exactly. You are treating the exhaust pipe instead of the engine.
Wait, okay. If the matter is physically fine, but the energy is stuck, is it kind of like a frozen pipe in a house?
How do you mean?
Like, say it's the middle of winter. The copper pipe itself isn't broken, right? The plumbing is structurally sound. But the water inside has frozen solid, so nothing flows. The sink doesn't work.
I see where you're going.
Modern medicine looks at the sink and says, oh, the sink is broken. Let's replace the faucet. But the faucet isn't the problem at all.
I really like that analogy. The faucet is just the physical symptom.
Right. So Zhu, this Eden intention we've been talking about, is essentially bypassing the faucet entirely. It acts as a sudden, intense blast of heat applied directly to the frozen section of the pipe.
Exactly. The intention melts the mental ice.
It unties the dead knot. And once that mental ice melts, the qi flows naturally again. And the physical disease resolves itself because the stagnation is gone.
That is the literal definition of shifting essence and changing qi. You aren't cutting out the disease. You are changing the internal environment so the disease can no longer survive.
It makes so much sense.
And the sources point out an incredibly eerie, fascinating detail about what happens when a patient successfully undergoes this process.
Oh, right. This part absolutely blew my mind.
It's wild. When a practitioner successfully uses Zuyu to guide a patient's mind back to that state of Eden and the deep physical healing occurs, the patient wakes up with absolutely no memory of the process.
Zero memory.
They have complete amnesia regarding the healing event itself.
But how is that even possible? I mean, if someone cures my chronic illness, you'd think that would be the most memorable emotional moment of my life.
You'd think so, definitely. But remember what we said about the ego. The conscious mind, the part of you that records memories, creates narratives, and judges the world, that is the exact part of you that is tied in the dead knot.
Ah.
That is the part of you that was cast out of Eden. Therefore, true healing cannot occur while the ego is online and observing.
It's like trying to repair an airplane engine while it's still running mid-flight. You have to shut it down.
Precisely. The practitioner uses intention to essentially bypass the conscious mind entirely, putting it into a profound state of suspension. The repair work happens deep in the unconscious, down in the fundamental energetic blueprint.
So they're working under the hood while the driver is asleep.
Exactly. And when the ego wakes back up, the body is lighter, the pain is gone, but the conscious mind cannot comprehend or remember how it happened because it wasn't present for it. It feels like waking up from a deep, dreamless sleep and finding you are suddenly just well.
That really forces you to take a hard look at your own daily life, doesn't it? If we're constantly generating our own physical reality from the top down, what are your dead knots?
It's a confronting question.
Right. What are the old arguments you replay in the shower every morning? What are the anxieties you wear like a badge of honor? Because we live in a culture that rewards being stressed and busy.
Oh, absolutely. Hustle culture.
But these ancient texts are screaming at us that those very thought patterns are actively manufacturing the physical ailments we suffer from.
It is a profound responsibility. If your mind is the architect of your illness, it is also the only true architect of your cure.
Which naturally leads to the giant elephant in the room here.
I know where you're going.
If this intention healing, this return to innocence, is the most profound, deeply effective medical intervention in human history, why is it essentially extinct?
It's the logical next question.
Why aren't we doing this in hospitals? Why are we building sprawling pharmaceutical complexes and spending trillions of dollars on research if the cure is just an internal mechanism?
Well, the sources don't shy away from this at all. They trace the history back to see exactly where we lost the thread.
And we have to go way back, right?
We have to rewind the clock far beyond recorded written history. The documents point to the Pailagang and Dawenku eras in ancient China. We are talking 4,000 to 8,000 years ago.
So prehistoric.
Yes. This is a time long before the invention of acupuncture needles, long before the cataloging of herbal medicine.
See, in modern terms, we usually look at prehistoric medicine and assume it was just primitive trial and error, like eating random roots and just hoping you don't die.
But the texts argue the exact opposite. They suggest that in these ancient eras, the understanding of the energetic body was at its absolute peak.
Really?
Yes. Healing was done purely through the connection of spirits using profound mental intention.
The sources bring up a specific figure from Chinese mythology to illustrate this, right? Bian Qi. Now, historically, Bian Qi is often celebrated as one of the earliest brilliant physicians, like a guy who knew his way around herbs and primitive surgery. But these texts decode the myth totally differently. They look at the etymology of his name.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The character Bian translates to the other shore, and Q means to remove suffering.
Okay.
So in this reading, Bian Qi wasn't just a historical doctor carrying a medical bag. The name itself is a metaphor for the Zhu Yu practitioner, a person whose entire function is to guide an ailing spirit away from the shore of suffering and trauma and deliver them safely to the other shore of perfect health and innocence.
The text even links this directly to the Buddhist concept of prajna paramita, right?
Yes, the perfection of wisdom that leads to the other shore.
It's a spiritual crossing, not a physical intervention.
Yeah.
But, and this is a massive caveat we need to talk about, there's a strict, unbreakable rule in Zhu Yu, and it is explicitly stated in the黄帝内经.
The rule is, if the patient's heart is unwilling, the treatment will have no effect.
And this is where the system just hits a brick wall. The spirit acts as a firewall.
It does.
You cannot heal someone against their will, and more importantly, you cannot heal someone who refuses to open their mind. Like, if I am deeply cynical, if I demand empirical evidence before I allow myself to relax, a Zhu Yu master could bombard me with the purest Eden intention imaginable.
Yeah.
And it would just bounce right off my energetic shield.
Exactly. The process requires a state the ancient Chinese called Tianzen. This translates to natural innocence or absolute unadulterated sincerity.
Tianzen.
Yes. The patient must possess a complete, trusting surrender to the process.
Which is the exact opposite of our modern, highly skeptical, evidence-demanding mindset.
Yes. If your first reaction to being sick is demanding a double-blind, peer-reviewed clinical trial before you believe a treatment can possibly work, you have functionally disqualified yourself from Zhu Yu.
Wow.
that skepticism, that demand for tangible proof, is the ultimate dead knot. It locks the door from the inside.
So, if this was so incredibly effective, why did society shift away from it? The sources offer a theory that is incredibly sharp and, frankly, a bit painful to hear. They suggest the fall of intention healing was a purely socioeconomic inevitability.
It's a tragic history.
It really is. They say it was destroyed by the rise of private property and the pursuit of profit.
It is a harsh economic reality. Look at the nature of Zuyu. It is invisible. It requires no physical materials.
There's nothing to buy.
Exactly. There are no supply chains, no manufacturing plants, no rare herbs to harvest. It is a completely free exchange of energetic resonance between two human beings.
Are the sources suggesting this is some sort of ancient conspiracy, like some proto-pharmaceutical executives decided to suppress magic to make a quick buck?
Not a conscious conspiracy, no. That would be oversimplifying it. The texts frame it more as a tragic cultural evolution. As human societies grew from small egalitarian tribes into complex hierarchical civilizations based on agriculture and trade, the pursuit of material wealth became the central organizing principle.
Right, society changed.
The concept of value became entirely tied to what could be touched, weighed, and traded.
And you can't put a price tag on guiding someone's spirit back to innocence. It doesn't generate GDP.
Exactly. The healers who began using physical herbs or rudimentary surgical tools, they could charge a premium for their tangible services. They had a product. As the cultural focus shifted entirely to the material world, the profound, subtle understanding of the Shen, the spirit, simply faded from the collective consciousness.
And because Zuyu requires the patient's absolute belief to work, as the culture stopped believing in it, it literally stopped working.
The firewall went up across entire civilizations.
We traded a free, internal, limitless mechanism of healing for complex, tangible, expensive treatments simply because you can tax a physical object.
It is a devastating loss of human potential when you look at it that way.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I want to really test the limits of this theory, because it's one thing to say intention healing can cure a stress headache or even an ulcer. It's entirely another to claim it can cure catastrophic systemic failure. And the sources do not hold back here. They claim Zuyu was the primary method for treating diseases that even today's multi-billion-dollar medical industry considers completely incurable. The focal point of their argument rests on one of the most terrifying diseases imaginable, ALS.
ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. In Chinese, the term for it is devastatingly descriptive. It's called Jiandongzheng, which translates to gradual freezing disease.
Yeah, it's just a chilling name for it.
It really captures the horror of it. For those who aren't familiar, it is a progressive, fatal neurodegenerative disease. It selectively destroys motor neurons. Over time, the patient loses the ability to walk, use their hands, speak, swallow, and eventually breathe, while their cognitive function usually remains perfectly intact.
They are trapped in a failing body.
Yes. Modern medicine can only offer slight symptom management. It is considered an irreversible death sentence.
But the ancient texts casually reveal that ALS is not some new modern illness caused by environmental toxins or genetic mutations in the industrial age. It was common and well documented 8,000 years ago.
They knew exactly what it was.
And the ancient healers had a hyper-specific mechanical explanation for what caused it. They didn't see it as a random stroke of bad luck. They viewed the root cause as a catastrophic structural failure in the energetic anatomy. Specifically, the accidental opening of what they call the 8 extraordinary meridians.
This is where we have to dive really deep into ancient energetic anatomy. In traditional Chinese medicine, you have the 12 standard meridians. Think of these as the surface-level rivers of energy that power your daily functions.
Digestion, movement, basic circulation.
Right. But beneath those rivers, you have the 8 extraordinary meridians. These are not rivers. They are deep, massive, primordial reservoirs of fundamental life force. They are the deepest core of your existence.
And the texts say that in a normal, healthy person, these massive reservoirs are mostly closed off or very tightly regulated.
Yes. They are meant to be reserves, not for daily use. But the ancient pathologists argued that if a person experiences a profound systemic shock, like a massive trauma, extreme exhaustion, or a spiritual collapse, these 8 extraordinary meridians can violently spring open.
Look, I have to stop you there, because we are talking about motor neurons dying, muscles literally wasting away, and the text is saying it's because a spiritual dam broke.
Yes.
What is the actual physics of that? How does a reservoir opening cause a physical body to freeze?
To understand the physics, we have to look at yin and yang. The texts explain that a normal human being simply does not possess enough yang energy to sustain the pressure of these massive meridians being open.
Let's define yin and yang clearly for the listener because it's the core of the mechanics here.
Good idea. In classical medical theory, yang represents heat, movement, expansion, the spark of the engine, the vital life force.
Okay, yang is the fire.
Yes. Yin represents cold, stillness, structure, heavy matter, fluid. Health is the dynamic balance of the two.
Okay, so what happens when those deep reservoirs open up?
Because the person cannot contain the sheer volume, their yang energy, their vital heat and spark, violently leaks out of the system. It drains away. And as the yang depletes, the yin energy is left completely unchecked. It floods the entire system.
An extreme yin is cold, heavy, and frozen.
Exactly. Hence, gradual freezing disease. The body is not just metaphorically freezing. From an energetic standpoint, the physical matter is literally crystallizing, because the metabolic fire has been extinguished. The motor neurons die because there's absolutely no key left to animate them.
Now, the sources mention a very specific historical formula that was used to treat this extreme yin state, and it comes with a massive historical correction.
Oh, this part is intense.
Yeah. They bring up a phrase found in ancient texts, 7 losses and 8 gains. Now, if you do a quick Google search or if you read modern pop interpretations of ancient Chinese texts, this phrase is almost universally described as an ancient sexual manual, like bedroom arts for emperors to live longer.
Right.
But the author of the notes we're reviewing is absolutely furious about this interpretation.
Furious is an understatement. The author practically reaches through the page to grab the reader by the collar. They state that reducing 7 losses and 8 gains to a sexual manual is a vulgar, tragic degradation of high-level science.
Wow.
Yeah. The texts argue it is actually a profound, mathematically precise, energetic formula designed to reverse catastrophic disease and prevent cellular decay.
So what are the actual mechanics of the formula? We can't just call it math and move on. What are we losing and what are we gaining?
It refers to the mechanics of qi and jing. The 7 losses represent the 7 physiological pathways through which human beings chronically leak their vital energy.
Like what?
This includes the loss of deep breathing, the loss of emotional regulation, the chronic depletion of physical fluids through overwork, the scattering of the mind through constant anxiety. These are the ways the battery drains on a daily basis.
And 8 gains.
These are the internal alchemical processes for generating and storing pristine energy, grounding the mind, centering the breath, harmonizing the organs, absorbing clear qi. But here's the critical part regarding ALS. The Zhu Yu practitioner uses this formula in conjunction with a physical principle the text calls yin and yang rooting in each other. I like to call it the rubber band effect.
Okay, explain the rubber band effect, because this is how they claim to actually cure the freezing, right?
Right. Think of yin and yang not as static boxes, but as a pendulum or a rubber band being stretched. When a rubber band is pulled extremely far in one direction, in the case of ALS, pulled to the absolute extreme limit of cold, heavy yin, what are you doing to the rubber band?
You're building an enormous amount of potential energy for it to snap back in the opposite direction.
Precisely. Because the patient's yin is so absolute, so devastatingly deep, the potential for yang energy is mathematically massive. The disease itself creates the kinetic vacuum for the cure.
That's brilliant.
The Zhu Yu practitioner does not fight the cold. They use focused intention to reach into the absolute bottom of that extreme yin, and they trigger the snapback.
They release the rubber band.
And when it snaps back, the texts say it generates a boundless, majestic yang energy that surges from the core of the patient. It is an overwhelming internal energetic explosion. It quite literally melts the frozen body from the inside out in a tidal wave of vital heat.
The sources outline a timeline for this treatment, and I have to challenge it because it sounds impossible. They claim that phase 1 of this healing halting the progression of ALS takes just 1 hour.
I know, it's a lot to take in.
60 minutes of intention therapy to stop a terminal disease. How do the sources justify that timeline? Modern science spends decades and billions of dollars and gets an extra 2 months of life expectancy.
It sounds impossible to a materialist worldview, but remember, they are not operating on the physical tissue first. The practitioner is shifting the energetic field. Energetic shifts like turning on a light switch or snapping a rubber band happen instantaneously. The 1 hour is the time it takes for the practitioner to guide the patient's spirit past the dead knot, reach the bottom of the yin, and trigger the yang surge. Once the yang is flowing, the freezing stops immediately. The root cause is eliminated.
But stopping the freezing doesn't mean the person just gets up and walks out of the room. The physical damage is still there.
Exactly. And the texts are very pragmatic about this. That is phase 2.
Oh.
The extreme yin state caused massive physical devastation. Muscles have atrophied, nerves have withered, the energetic environment is fixed in an hour, but the jing, the heavy physical matter, takes time to catch up and rebuild.
That makes sense.
The source's state, phase 2, takes 1 to 2 years of constant energetic support and physical therapy to rebuild the tissue, restore swallowing, and restore speech. The energy leads, the matter follows slowly.
It's an absolutely breathtaking medical theory, and it highlights just how terrifying these diseases were to ancient people. Imagine living 8,000 years ago and watching a family member slowly freeze in place or suddenly lose the ability to speak.
It would be horrifying.
It was so traumatic, so mysterious, that they didn't just write medical textbooks about it. They encoded these pathologies into their oral traditions, into their most sacred myths.
This is one of the most brilliant insights in the sources. They look at classic mythology not as fiction, but as encrypted medical data. A perfect example is the classic Chinese epic Journey to the West.
Right, the story of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. It's probably the most famous piece of literature in East Asia.
Easily. Now, during his spiritual training, Sun Wukong's master warns him that to achieve immortality, he will have to survive the 3 calamities. If he fails, his existence will be erased.
And usually we read this as just a cool fantasy plot device, like magic trials for a superhero monkey.
Yeah.
But the sources decode the 3 calamities, thunder, fire, and wind, revealing them to be highly accurate, step-by-step, diagnostic metaphors for severe bodily breakdowns.
Let's unpack the medical reality behind the myth. The first trial is the thunder calamity. In the story, a heavenly thunderbolt strikes the practitioner. Medically, the sources decode this as a sudden, violent surge of internal heat, a state they call huozi.
What does that look like in a patient?
It's a rapid, uncontrollable metabolic spike. The patient's face flushes beet red. Their body burns with a terrible, rushing heat that feels like an internal thunderstorm. Blood pressure skyrockets. The sources map this specifically to the onset of severe metabolic syndrome and advanced diabetes. The sudden systemic inflammation is the lightning strike.
Wow. Then we have the fire calamity. In the myth, a fire doesn't fall from the sky. It starts from the soles of your feet and burns upward, reducing your organs to ash.
Medically, this is termed yin fire. It originates at the Yongquan point on the bottom of the foot and surges upward, but it is not a literal physical fire that burns the skin. The symptom is profound neurological destruction.
So it's a nerve sensation.
Exactly. The patient feels a burning sensation, but their limbs go completely soft and powerless. The flesh turns to mush.
Which is a terrifyingly accurate description of the progression of advanced neuropathy, or ALS. You feel the burning pain of the nerves dying, but the motor function is utterly destroyed. You lose all structural integrity.
And the final trial is the wind calamity. The myth says a dark wind blows through your fontanelle, the top of your skull, and dissolves your bones and flesh until you are nothing.
How did that translate medically?
The sources decode this as guo wind. This represents a sudden, catastrophic loss of bone density, severe osteoporosis. The structural matrix of the body hollows out. The patient becomes incredibly brittle, they suffer a fall, and the trauma of the physical impact forces the energetic point at the top of the skull, the baihui point, wide open.
And when that cranial point opens,
the last remaining yang energy violently escapes the body, leading to sudden, untreatable paralysis and rapid death. This perfectly describes the severe, rapid decline we often see in the elderly today, where a simple fall leads to a total systemic breakdown within weeks.
It completely reframes how we should view history. What if the monsters, the dragons, the magical calamities in our oldest stories across all cultures, Greek, Norse, Chinese, biblical era, were actually encoded warnings?
That makes you wonder.
Because before universities existed, how do you pass down crucial pathological data so that it survives for 100 generations? You wrap the medical data in a fairy tale.
It is the ultimate oral tradition of survival.
But if these myths encoded the diseases, the body destroying itself, the ancient texts also insist they encoded the cure. They believed human beings possess a built-in mechanism to heal any disease, an internal pharmacy.
Right.
And this pharmacy is encoded in another famous myth, the creation of humanity by the goddess Nua.
In the myth, the goddess Nua creates humans by taking pure water and mixing it with yellow mud. She shapes the figures, breathes life into them, and they become humanity. Again, a standard creation archetype.
But the medical decoding here is fascinating. The sources argue this is not a historical account of human origins. It's a real-time metaphor for the human body's intrinsic creation mechanism.
Every single day, your body is engaged in a process of creation and filtration. In this decoding, the water Nua uses represents clear ki. This is the pure, life-giving, oxygenated, nourishing energy in our bodies.
And the mud.
The mud represents turbid ki. This is the heavy, stagnant metabolic waste, the toxic byproducts of cellular activity.
So how does the internal pharmacy work?
When a practitioner activates this creation mechanism through Zhu, when the mind returns to innocence, the body acts like a divine refinery. It takes the clear ki and the turbid ki, the water and the mud, and it processes them together through an internal alchemy. Out of this friction, the body manufactures a highly specialized substance the texts call sweet dew.
Sweet dew. It sounds poetic, but what is it biologically? Are we talking about endorphins, stem
Yes.
cells?
It encompasses all of that, but it is much more precise. Sweet dew is described as the ultimate bespoke internal medicine. It is a perfectly synthesized compound created by your own blueprint, designed specifically to heal whatever is currently breaking down in your specific body.
So it's custom medicine.
Yes. The texts claim this sweet dew is the key to treating the most baffling modern ailments. Brain atrophy, sudden severe memory loss, chronic brain fog, and even extreme emotional dysregulation and tantrums in children. It nourishes the brain and repairs the neurological pathways.
I'm trying to think about how to visualize this, and I stumbled into an analogy. Tell me if this works. It's like every single human being is walking around with a state-of-the-art, multi-billion-dollar 3D printer installed inside their body.
Okay, I like this.
This printer contains the schematics to print any medicine, any hormone, any cellular repair kit you could ever need. It can print the cure for the inflammation, the cure for the memory loss. The printer works perfectly. The raw materials, the water and mud, are fully stocked. But we've completely forgotten the Wi-Fi password to send the print job from our brain to the machine. We are completely disconnected from our own hardware because our minds are too cluttered. And Zuyu, this focused, innocent intention, is the Wi-Fi password.
I think that is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The sweet dew is the print job. The physical body is waiting, begging for the command, but the conscious mind is too distracted, too stressed, too full of dead knots to send the signal. So the printer sits idle while the body degrades and relies on external pills that are essentially crude approximations of what the body could make perfectly.
That is a profoundly empowering thought, but it brings up a very dark, very tragic problem. We've established that Zuyu requires the patient's active participation. The patient must have Tianzin's sincere innocence. They have to actively enter the password.
Yes, the firewall.
But what if the Wi-Fi receiver itself, the patient's brain, is completely corrupted?
This is the most difficult challenge in the entire paradigm.
Right. What if the patient has profound late-stage dementia or severe nonverbal autism? They literally cannot understand your instructions to visualize Eden. They cannot consciously participate. According to the rules we just laid out, the firewall would block the healing, right? Because they can't offer sincerity.
Exactly. The texts refer to the state as having evil in the heart. Now, we must be very clear here. Evil does not mean moral wickedness or demonic possession.
Right, it's a medical term.
In classical Chinese medicine, evil simply refers to a severe pathogenic factor, an absolute blockage or distortion of the energy field. The spirit is trapped.
How does a practitioner diagnose that the spirit is trapped, rather than just confused?
The primary diagnostic is the eyes. The texts state that in these patients, the eyes are vacant, hollow, constantly shifting, or completely devoid of light. The physical body is present, but the person is simply not there. The Shen is locked away.
So for these patients, standard Zuyu is useless. You can't talk them into healing. So what is the protocol? Do they just give up?
No. The texts state that before any physical healing can happen, the mind must first be violently washed. You have to shatter the distortion from the outside in. To do this, the sources introduce a highly advanced, almost esoteric technique called the Seven Dragons Needle.
Seven Dragons Needle. It sounds like a martial arts technique. What is the actual procedure?
Traditionally, it involves placing physical acupuncture needles in a highly specific array. 7 inner points and 7 outer points on the body, designed to open the deepest energetic pathways. However, the sources reveal something incredible.
Which is?
The highest, most masterful form of this therapy requires absolutely no physical needles.
Wait, needleless acupuncture? How does intention link physical points in the body without a needle? Are they using biomagnetism?
The sources argue that consciousness itself is a non-local field. The practitioner uses pure, concentrated intention to instantly link these 14 points inside the patient's energetic body.
Wow.
They are essentially acting as an external battery, creating a new, temporary energetic circuit within the patient, forcefully bypassing the corrupted mind entirely.
And the sources describe the physical reaction of the patient when this happens. It's incredibly visceral. Even if the patient is entirely nonverbal, even if they're deep in the fog of dementia, they react. The texts say the patient experiences a powerful, undeniable sensation of real water flowing through these 14 connected points.
Yes, they describe it as a literal water dragon. The practitioner's intention drives this energy into the patient's tailbone. It rushes violently up the spine, clearing the blockages, and pulls into the crown of the head, a point called bai hui.
This is the washing of the heart. The water dragon rushes through the system, breaking the mental dead knots by sheer energetic force. It flushes out the stagnation that is trapping the spirit. It's a profound, systemic reboot of the hard drive.
And the immediate result, the undeniable sign that the circuit connected, is that the light returns to the patient's eyes. The vacancy is replaced by presence. The spirit rushes back into the body.
It's a beautiful image. But the sources are quick to warn that this is not a magic trick you do once and walk away from. It's not a permanent fix in 5 minutes.
No, it requires immense vigilance. After the washing, the practitioner must carefully observe the patient's spirit. They must attempt to communicate with them to gauge if the light has truly stabilized or if the fog is rolling back in. If the connection fades, they have to wait a few days and perform the water dragon again.
The text also briefly mentions another technique called the rainbow bridge, alongside the seven dragons needle, designed to reach a mind that is otherwise unreachable. It really highlights just how obsessively ancient medicine focused on consciousness as the absolute root of physical reality. Only when the heart is washed, only when the spirit is present and the firewall is down, can the actual physical ailments be treated with the sweet dew.
This brings us full circle. The mind is the beginning and the end of the medical journey.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. Let's try to synthesize everything we've unpacked for the listener. We started with the incredibly radical premise that the Bible, specifically the story of the Garden of Eden, is not a moral fable, but a psychological and energetic blueprint for healing, where returning to pure innocence is the ultimate cure.
We connected that biblical key to the ancient Chinese mechanics of Jing, Qi, and Shen. We saw how a dead knot in the spirit freezes the physical body, creating a spiritual traffic jam, and how the principle of shifting essence and changing key melts that mental ice.
We explored the tragedy of how this free, intention-based healing was lost to the economic realities of societies that only valued what they could touch and sell. We looked at the terrifying reality of ALS, the extreme yin state, and how the ancient mathematical formula of 7 losses and 8 gains uses the rubber band effect to spark boundless yang energy and reverse the irreversible.
We decoded the mythological 3 calamities of thunder, fire, and wind into highly accurate medical diagnostics for diabetes, neuropathy, and osteoporosis. We discovered the Nua creation mechanism, our internal 3D printer that manufactures Sweet Dew, the bespoke cure for modern cognitive ailments.
And finally, we saw how the 7 Dragons needle uses an intention-based water dragon to wash the heart of those whose minds are trapped in dementia or autism, proving that the spirit can be reached even in the deepest darkness.
It is a massive, cohesive paradigm. And the main takeaway for you, listening right now, is profoundly personal. You might not have an ancient zoo you master living down the street. You might not know how to consciously trigger the water dragon to cure a chronic illness. But the core lesson applies to every single one of us, every single day.
What is that lesson exactly?
Your mental fixations, your resentments, your chronic anxieties, your need to control the future, your dead knots, they have profound, tangible physical consequences. They are not just passing thoughts. They are biology in the making. Releasing them, finding moments of pure, unburdened innocence, is not just a nice psychological exercise for your weekend. It is the first mandatory step to true physical health. You are the architect.
Exactly. You have to melt the ice before the water can flow. Which leaves us with one final lingering thought to mull over as we close out. The ancient texts are absolutely adamant about one thing. Intention healing only works if you have absolute innocent belief, if your heart is sincere. If you demand proof before you believe, the firewall goes up and the healing fails.
It's the ultimate paradox.
It is. Look at our modern world. We have been trained since birth to only believe in what we can see under a microscope. We demand the jagged white line on the X-ray. We demand double-blind data. We demand peer review. And we pride ourselves on our unyielding skepticism. But what if that very skepticism is the disease? Have we accidentally trained our brains to be immune to our own greatest healing power? By insisting that we must understand every mechanism before we surrender, have we, through our own rigid intellect, permanently locked ourselves out of the Garden of Eden?
It's a haunting question.
Think about that. Until next time on The Deep Dive.